In the small town tucked away in the heartland of the United States, Ethan Miller lived a life marked by silent restlessness and dreams that always seemed to stretch beyond his reach. Ethan's routine mirrored that of so many others. Early mornings, quiet streets, and steady hours working as an assistant at a local farm supply store. Though his job provided stability, it could not fill the subtle emptiness echoing in his chest, made louder by the evenings spent alone in his cramped apartment. Within those modest four walls, Ethan often faced his own reflection, standing before the mirror and sensing an invisible urge calling him beyond what he saw, a silent invitation to question his path and to defy the boundaries of a predictable life. From an early age, Ethan had been a curious observer, always wondering if life might have something different in store for him. Simple scenes, the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of old jazz on the radio, sunlight flickering across the glass, fed his quiet hope. As a child, he would play make-believe in the mirror, imagining grand adventures far from his small-town world. Over the years, that reflection became more than just an image. It was a gateway to doubts, dreams, and fears about the future, challenging him to wonder how far he could go with only courage at his side. The town Ethan grew up in seemed content with its unchanging routine, encouraging young people to fit in, work hard, save up, and settle down just like generations before. But the daily encounters with the mirror stirred something deeper in Ethan. With each glance, he felt a growing pull towards something greater, an awareness that perhaps he was meant for more than what the world expected of him. Yet there was always an unspoken warning. Maybe, just maybe, looking twice into the mirror was to invite truths and changes from which there could be no return. On that grey Tuesday, Ethan woke up carrying a different kind of weight on his shoulders. The coffee tasted more bitter than usual, and the news drifting from the television only deepened the feeling that every day blurred into the next. Hurrying to the bathroom, he caught his reflection in the mirror, not just his own face staring back, but a growing restlessness, a silent calling to seek answers about himself. It was as though suddenly all the questions he'd ignored for years pressed on him in that instant. Ethan hesitated, took a deep breath, and almost by accident, looked once and then twice into his own eyes. That second glance brought a physical discomfort, a strange mix of fear and expectation, as if the mirror itself held secrets waiting to surface. Trying to shrug off the discomfort, Ethan continued on to work. On his walk through the cold streets, every shop window reflected fragments of who he was or who he thought he was. With every passing surface, a question tugged at him. Was he really living the life he wanted? Flashes from the moment in front of the mirror kept intruding on his mind between customers at the store, making it hard to focus. His co-workers sensed something was off, but Ethan just smiled, hiding the storm of emotion inside. He started to feel like a stranger in his own routine, questioning old decisions, buried feelings, and the path he'd taken up to this point. During his lunch break, Ethan stepped away from the noisy store. He wandered in silence to a small local park, clutching his battered notebook, a quiet friend since adolescence. Seating himself on a bench under the shadow of a tree, he turned to a fresh page and poured his unease into words. He described the way the mirror had unsettled him, the confusion in his chest, the persistent questions that seemed to whisper every time he faced his own reflection. More than ever, he felt a need to understand the root of this call, to dig into what gnawed at him, and perhaps to discover something entirely new. Returning home late in the afternoon, Ethan felt even more affected by everything he'd experienced. The mirror at the stairwell didn't just capture his image, it reflected the weight of choices not made, paths never taken, and opportunities left behind. The fear of revisiting certain truths mingled with the excitement of possibly changing direction forever. Before bed, he stood once more before the bedroom mirror, hesitating at the sight of his own face. His greatest fear was no longer the unknown, but carrying on unchanged if he didn't accept the invitation to look deeper, even if only once, because he knew that doing so would mean starting again, with no turning back. In the days that followed, Ethan noticed subtle changes creeping into his routine. Actions that had always been automatic were now tinged with doubt and the possibility of unexplored paths. Passing mirrors and shop windows downtown, he avoided meeting his own gaze out of a strange fear of what he might discover. It was as if one more look could unleash a flood of feelings he'd long kept at bay, making it impossible to ignore the restlessness that had taken root inside him. Yet beneath this anxiety, a quiet quiet courage began to grow, fueled by his need for change and his desire to claim something truly his own. The nights became battlegrounds for his thoughts. Ethan found himself tossing and turning, wrestling with questions that reached deep into his past. Memories, past sacrifices, abandoned dreams, all the times he'd held back his own voice, rose up demanding attention. During this time, his journal entries took on new depth. He wrote about identity, fear, hope, and the struggle to transform. Unintentionally, his battered notebook became a different sort of mirror, one that let him explore parts of himself he'd never confronted before. Writing gave him a safe, silent place to imagine possibilities, voicing what was otherwise trapped inside. One evening, after a tiring shift, Ethan ran into Olivia, an old classmate who'd recently upended her predictable life to open a small coffee shop across town. The timing was no coincidence. Olivia had found the courage to step through her own mirror, breaking away from everyone else's expectations. Their conversation lingered on courage, fresh starts, and the fear of leaving one's comfort zone. Olivia's openness inspired Ethan. Her story proved that his own calling was real and that he was not alone in searching for meaning. He felt a spark urging him to take concrete action, even if he wasn't sure where to begin. In the weeks that followed, Ethan set himself small daily goals, taking a new route home from work, chatting with strangers, finally trying things he'd always put off. He discovered that the biggest changes can be born from the simplest acts, as long as they're guided by hope and intent. Each modest victory allowed another piece of his true self to emerge. The fear he'd once felt at the mirror's edge lingered, but slowly lessened as he realized what was possible. It wasn't just about avoiding his reflection, it was about accepting the challenge to transform without looking back, except to honor how far he'd come. As time went by, Ethan realized that real change required more than just willpower. It demanded perseverance in the face of adversity and the resolve to challenge old habits. It wasn't always easy. Some days he desperately wished to hide from the world, to avoid the mirror, and remain in the comfort of familiar circles where nothing felt risky. Yet the internal calling grew louder, impossible to silence. In moments of solitude, especially during the long winter nights, Ethan felt he was teetering between fear and hope, on the threshold of crossing an invisible line that separated his past from any possible future. Coming home each day became a ritual of personal confrontation. The hallway mirror symbolized not only chances waiting to be seized, but also the difficulties that change would bring. Ethan made a habit of glancing at it quickly, never looking too long, as if he respected an unspoken rule about not gazing too deeply at certain truths. But in braver moments, he challenged himself. He stared straight into his own eyes, searching for confirmation that his path was right. With each small act of courage and every new choice, his reflection gradually revealed a little less fear and far more strength. At work, Ethan's internal changes soon showed themselves in his relationships. Co-workers who had always kept their distance drew nearer, interested by his renewed energy and the stories he now had to share. He realized that inspiring change around him was as rewarding as his own transformation. Even small positive feedback motivated him to keep trying, despite inevitable setbacks. Ethan learned to savor subtle victories and came to understand that stumbling was part of the journey. In this new chapter, each interaction opened doors to opportunities he never would have imagined before, spurring him to break out of his shell and embrace challenges he once feared. The real turning point came one unexpected evening after a long phone call with his sister Natalie, who lived in another city and had always been his anchor during tough times. Her sharp honesty awakened Ethan to the realization that he was finally living instead of just existing. He decided it was time to tell his story with greater authenticity and less fear. After hanging up, he faced the old bedroom mirror without hesitation. This time he didn't look away quickly. Instead, he smiled, accepting that his search for himself was only just beginning, and that he'd never again be a prisoner of the past or an incomplete reflection. As the seasons changed, Ethan gradually built a new outlook on himself and the world around him. Over time, he learned that facing the mirror was not just a physical act, but a ritual of deep acceptance, a daily invitation to recognize his own shadows and strengths. His mornings, once automatic, now began with quiet reflection. He allowed himself to question, to be grateful, and to sketch new plans for the day ahead. He realized that a gentle courage had blossomed inside him, growing not from the sudden absence of fear, but from a determination to confront it a little more each day. His progress, sometimes invisible to others, had enormous value for someone finally discovering his truest self. The mirror, which for so long had been a symbol of unease, became instead a gateway to self-knowledge and freedom. Looking at his reflection was no longer an act of anxiety, but an opportunity to revisit dreams, acknowledge limits, and set new goals. Ethan learned to laugh at his stumbles, to give himself permission to fail, and to celebrate every small victory, never underestimating the value of the process itself. Many days he would lean against his doorframe, quietly talking to himself about the next steps, grateful for his scars and proud of his daily accomplishments. These routines, simple at first glance, marked his personal rebuilding and paved a hopeful path forward. As he broke free from fear's grip, Ethan saw that opportunities really did exist for those brave enough to see them. He received invitations for new professional challenges, rekindled old friendships, and nurtured new ones based on authentic connection. He never lost sight of the importance of pausing, reflecting, and sharing what he'd learned. His daily conversations with Natalie became even more valuable, a lifeline for his growing dreams. Ethan realized that his transformation could inspire others, and this new sense of purpose added another bright layer to his life. The path Ethan shaped for himself became a living example, not only for him, but for everyone touched by his story. The mirror's silent message was clear: everyone holds the power to reinvent themselves, even when the odds seem stacked against them. True courage lives in daily details, in long, searching looks at the person you are and the person you hope to become. Now, each time Ethan passed a mirror, he no longer dreaded looking twice, not because he sought easy answers, but because he recognized the beauty in the journey and knew that, from now on, he was truly ready to keep moving forward. On his journey, Ethan Miller discovered that the mirror was not merely an object, but a symbol of the countless possibilities and challenges life constantly offers. The silent calling to face his fears became, day by day, an inner force powerful enough to launch new beginnings and redraw the boundaries of what he once thought possible. His process of self-discovery revealed that courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to move forward despite it. Ethan welcomed each doubt, each moment of hesitation, and above all, each scar from his efforts, redefining them as the marks of his own growth. He learned that some of the greatest changes are born from the smallest gestures, as long as there is honesty in his gaze and the willingness to confront himself. The connections Ethan rebuilt and strengthened throughout his journey became essential foundations, helping him weather life's storms and celebrate his victories. Inspired by those who dared to defy the ordinary, he found in human connection the fundamental support needed to keep moving forward, even when hope seemed faint. Deep conversations, Natalie's guidance, and Olivia's example all became fuel for his own renewal. Along the way, Ethan realized that no one travels a path of transformation entirely alone. By sharing his mistakes, successes, and lessons learned, he discovered the true meaning of belonging and nurtured a desire to inspire others to pursue their best selves as well. Now standing before the mirror, Ethan sees not only who he is, but who he can become each time he accepts the subtle invitation not to fear the unknown. Every challenge turned into experience becomes a unique opportunity for growth. In each attentive look at his own reflection, the promise of a more authentic and meaningful life waits to be written day after day. And so, Ethan continues his journey, knowing that true strength does not lie in never hesitating when facing oneself, but in the certainty that, by daring to look twice, anyone can always begin again, reinvent themselves, and inspire others along the way.